They say only the good die young, but my grandfather was living proof that the truly evil can live forever. He was a monster, a relic from a bygone era who clung to life with a spiteful grip. On his 154th birthday, the whole family gathered, not to celebrate, but to stare. We watched the man who had tormented generations, a man who seemed to defy death itself. His eyes, clouded with age but still sharp with malice, scanned each of us. He had outlived his children, his grandchildren, and was now staring down his great-grandchildren. Me. My name is Alara, and I was the one he'd chosen to pass his curse to. Every day, the town whispered he made a deal with the devil. Some said, he feeds on the youth of his own family. Others gossiped, and honestly, I believed him. He never left his crumbling mansion on the hill, a place that seemed to rot from the inside out, just like him. He'd summon us, one by one, to his dusty, dimly lit study. He'd sit there in his high-backed chair, a living gargoyle, and just watch. He'd ask probing questions, peeling back our layers, until we felt raw and exposed. He knew our secrets, our fears, our deepest shames. He never raised his voice, but his words were like acid, dissolving our souls. He'd pit us against each other, brother against sister, cousin against cousin, all for his own twisted amusement. The family fortune was vast, and he used it as his primary weapon, dangling inheritances like a puppeteer pulling strings. We all danced to his tune, hating him, but terrified of being cut off. The day he called for me, I was 25. I walked up the winding path to the mansion, the air growing colder with each step. I found him in his study, as always. But this time, something was different. The usual cruel glint in his eye was gone, replaced by an exhaustion so profound it seemed to weigh down the very air in the room. He looked ancient, not just old, but like a stone that had been weathered by 1,000 storms. Alara, he rasped, his voice like gravel. Sit. I did, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He gestured to a small, ornate wooden box on the table beside him. Do you know what this is? He asked. I shook my head, my throat too tight to speak. This, he said, his voice barely a whisper, is my prison, and soon it will be yours. He began to tell me a story that sounded like a dark fairy tale. He spoke of his own youth, a time when he was a young man named Elias, full of ambition and love. He had a wife, Serafina, the love of his life. They were happy, but a strange illness took her, one the doctors couldn't explain. Desperate, Elias sought out forbidden knowledge, ancient rituals, anything to save her. He found a recluse in the deep woods who offered him a deal, a pact with an ancient, forgotten entity. The entity would spare Serafina, but the price was steep. Elias would become its anchor in the mortal world. He would live, and live, and live, unable to die, a vessel for its power. And in exchange for this unending life, the entity would sustain Serafina. Young and foolish, blinded by love, Elias agreed. He opened the box. Inside, nestled on velvet, was a single, withered black rose. It was completely dry, yet it seemed to pulse with a faint dark light. The entity kept its promise, he continued. Serafina recovered, but I began to change. He didn't age. A decade passed, then two. While his wife grew older, he remained the same. The town started to whisper. Fear turned to accusation. They called him a demon. The love in Serafina's eyes was slowly replaced by fear. She, the reason for his sacrifice, began to pull away. She saw him not as her husband, but as an unnatural thing. The very immortality he had embraced to save her became the chasm that tore them apart. He became a prisoner in his own home, watching the world and everyone he loved move on without him. He explained that the entity fed on strong emotions, despair, anger, bitterness. To sustain himself, to keep the pact going, he had to cultivate these feelings. That's why he was cruel. That's why he tormented the family. Our misery was his lifeblood. His cruelty wasn't for his enjoyment. It was a necessary, agonizing act of survival. He wasn't a monster by choice. He was a zookeeper for a demon that lived inside him, and he had to keep it fed. If he ever let his emotional guard down, if he allowed himself to feel peace or joy, the entity would weaken, the pact would break, and he would finally, instantly, turn to dust. And what of Serafina? She lived a long, healthy life, but she never truly came back to him. She died of old age in a separate wing of the mansion, cared for by staff, a stranger in her own home. He had saved her body, but lost her heart. The curse, he explained, had a clause. It could be passed on, but only to one of his bloodline who understood the sacrifice and willingly accepted it. All these years, his cruelty was a test. He was searching for someone strong enough, someone who could bear the weight of this eternal damnation. He looked at me, his ancient eyes pleading. I am tired, El-Ara. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have watched the faces of my children wrinkle and fade. I can no longer bear it. He pushed the box towards me. Take it, take my place. Let me rest. I looked at the withered rose, this symbol of a love so powerful it had shattered time. I looked at the man before me, not as the evil grandfather I'd always known, but as Elias, a heartbroken man who had made a terrible mistake. He saw the hesitation in my eyes. If you refuse, he rasped, the entity will be unbound. The pact will be broken, but not in the way you think. It will consume my lineage. It will hunt down every last one of us, a hunger that has been contained for over a century. Finally, let loose. Your parents, your cousins, your future children, all gone. It wasn't a threat. It was a horrifying, absolute certainty. He had been our tormentor, yes, but he had also been our unknowing protector. His prison was also our shield. I was faced with an impossible choice: condemn myself to an eternity of lonely misery, or condemn my entire family to annihilation. I thought of my younger brother, my parents, the future I had dreamed of. Was my happiness worth more than all of their lives? My hand trembled as I reached for the box. My fingers brushed against the cold, ancient wood. I looked into his eyes one last time, and for the first time, I saw not a monster, but a man begging for release. A single tear traced a path through the dust on his cheek. In that moment, I understood. This wasn't about hate or evil. It was about sacrifice. It was about a love that had curdled into a curse. I took a deep breath, the scent of dust and decay filling my lungs. I closed my fingers around the box, and a cold shock jolted up my arm. His eyes widened, and then, a look of profound, unbelievable relief washed over his features. A genuine smile, the first I had ever seen, touched his lips. "Thank you," he whispered. And then, he began to fade. Not into dust, but into light. He dissolved into a million glowing motes that danced in the air for a moment before vanishing, leaving only silence and the heavy weight of the box in my hands. I was now the anchor, the jailer. I was 25 years old, and I was about to live forever. And if my family was to survive, they could never know the truth. To them, I would simply be the granddaughter who, like the grandfather she'd always hated, refused to die.